today we are looking at the Using Office Equipment unit, so that's unit S220, which is one of the SQA units for vocational awards. The summary of this unit, so the description for it is that it is for people who use a range of office equipment such as photocopiers, faxes, binders, laminators, printers or PCs, applying the necessary standards of health and safety and operating practice while using them. This unit is at SCQF level 5 and there's 4 credit values. That means 40 hours it should take to learn these skills, perform them to a competent standard and take part in the assessments for the unit. If you're unsure about what would constitute or what would be an acceptable type of office equipment for this unit, discuss that with your assessor. Obviously things such as staplers and manual hole punches probably wouldn't be useful enough for this unit, but sort of substantial office equipment, certainly the ones that are listed there, it would be an excellent example of what you could write for your statement. So when you're producing evidence for this unit, think of the business processes which you do where you use a variety of office equipment or use a number of office equipment to complete that activity. We'll go through the unit, we'll go through the standards and the framework, see what the units are, and that should help guide and give you some inspiration, but always relate this stuff to a process that you are doing in the workplace. Important point to make here is that this unit can be done on PCs, so that's often one that's overlooked. When you use a PC, when you use a computer to perform tasks in the workplace, that can be used for this unit, and so there's a lot of opportunity there to look at evidence you've already produced where you've used a computer that can be mapped into this unit. So let's get started. So types of office equipment. So what are the different types? We'll just do a quick run through of the various types and then we'll have a look at their features. First one's printers. There's 2 main types of printers. So the first is inkjet. Inkjet printers are what you might have in your house. They are smaller, they are cheaper, they are typically slower than the other type of printer, which is a laser jet. Typically because of this, they are not shared with a large number of computers. It works by shooting ink onto a sheet of paper and they typically print in colour, so you've got options for printing in colour. So most of these are very cheap, they're readily available, they don't cost a lot, but because they're cheap they are quite slow and they're typically used, they're just connected with a wire into a computer, they're really networked up to a group of computers. The other type of printer is a laserjet printer. These are larger and more expensive. They do print quicker though. Because they're more durable, bigger, they are typically shared with the whole office. The difference is that it is technology within them. In a laserjet, a laser is used on a photosensitive drum. Toner is then applied and that creates an image onto the paper. So instead of using ink, they use toner. Typically these require 3 toner cartridges, magenta, yellow, cyan. Some are just black and white, so they just have the black toner in there as well if they have colour. A lot of these just print black, the standard cheaper ones, although the big, larger office grade ones print in colour. So let's have a look at the main features of printers. So first feature we're looking at here is duplex printouts. So what this means is that the printer can do back-to-back printing, so they can print on both sides of the page. The media capacity of the printer is something that would be looked at, and that is the size of the paper tray. A number of printers will have multiple printer trays, and that way you can put in different sizes of paper and you can put in different types of paper, so different thicknesses. Some printers have a drawer you could put in envelopes or card, depends on what your organisation is printing off. Media size is the maximum size of paper that can be used. A lot of the cheaper printers will print A4 and more expensive printers will print A3 or above. But it's not a standard across all printers, so you want to check what printer you've got. The larger printers in the office almost always go up to a much larger size than A3. But for the smaller ones that you typically see in a home office or in the home, you'd have to look in to see what size of paper they would print. The media type, so that is the type of paper that can be used. Different types would include paper envelopes, there's labels, photo paper, high gloss film, matte paper and recycled paper. Mono or colour, so if that is if the printer can produce only black and white copies, or if it could produce full colour copies. Monthly usage, so not all printers are produced equally, and when manufacturers create them, they will test them to see what the capacity is for the number of prints that they can produce in a given time period, so like a week or a month. If you print more than that amount, the printer will still work, but it will increase the likelihood that it would need to be repaired because it would break. So that is the number of monthly printouts that is expected. Printing more than this will increase the likelihood of a breakdown. Networkable, so this is an important feature. Used to be that this was an expensive feature. This would indicate that the printer was quite expensive if it could be added to a network. So what that means is that they've been connected to multiple computers over a network. You might have seen these in your house if you've got one, and that's where you can connect, rather than getting a wire from the printer to your computer, you connect your printer over the Wi-Fi to your Wi-Fi router, and then any computer that's on your home Wi-Fi network can print to that computer without having to have a cable connection. Noise is about how loud the printer is. This can be important if you're working in an office that is open plan and people on the phone are having meetings, discussions. It's important to have a printer that isn't too loud. You've got print resolution, so that is the print quality, and it's typically measured in dots per square inch. The final feature on this that we're looking at is the print speed, and that's how quickly the printer can print. It's typically measured in pages per minute, or ppm. So ppm is the print speed, dpi is the print revolution, that's dots per square inch, so the more dots per square inch, the higher quality the image is. Print speed is also important if your organisation is printing a lot of paper. If that's an important part of a business process where you have to print a lot of paper copies, it's important that you have a printer which has a high page per minute rate. Otherwise, you'll be wasting a lot of time waiting on the printouts coming. So when it comes to producing your evidence, this information is very useful, but it's not a case of just writing this down as if it's an answer. You've got to relate this to your work that you're doing and to your business process that you're discussing or you're producing evidence on. So when you produce a business process, a lot of this is something you might not necessarily think about. A lot of it is something you would just do naturally or would just be obvious. You don't necessarily think about it too much. When it comes to producing your evidence, to look at covering these points, this can help break it down and to get the detail that is required to cover these points. So that's why we're going through this, but it is important you don't simply reproduce what we're discussing here. You take it and you discuss how that applies to a business process which you're performing. So for example, you may be involved in processing applications, and those applications have to be, for regulatory reasons, they have to be paper copies with a paper signature, because that is what is required. Say it's a financial product that you're selling and digital signatures aren't required. You would want to make sure that the printer was A4. Doesn't matter if it colours in colour, can be black and white, that's fine. You want it networked up because there's a number of people in your office that would use it, and you'd also require it to print in a high page per minute rate because you're printing a lot of these documents, and your monthly usage should be a high rate, so it should be an enterprise, a business grade machine, not a home office type machine. It should be an expensive, durable office machine that doesn't necessarily have to print in any paper larger than A4, doesn't necessarily have to print in colour, but does have to have high page per minute and high dots per minute as well for the quality of it. So that's you taking that information and applying it to a workplace situation, and when you're producing evidence for this, it's important to do that rather than just talk about it as a theory. So let's look at scanners. There's a mixed type of office equipment. There's two different ones. So the bit on the top is an automatic document feeder. So that is where you set a number of loose pages at the top of it. You press the scan button and the printer automatically feeds in each individual sheet of paper and it scans it as it goes through. You've got the other type where you lift the lid. You place the one page, close the lid and press the scan button and scan it that way. So the features of scanners. So automatic document feeder, just mentioned it there, allows multiple pages to be scanned at the same time. Duplexing allows scanning on both sides of the document. quite rare that the type of scanner where you have to lift the lid and put the document in can scan on both sides. A lot of the time the scanning on both sides of duplexing is to do with the automatic document feeder, but not all printers, particularly smaller home office type printer scanners, have this feature. Some of them only scan on the one side, so that's always worth looking at if you are looking to purchase or you're looking to select a printer. You wouldn't, if you needed to have double sided scanning and you're scanning a lot of documents, you would not pick a printer that one doesn't have a document feeder and two can't scan both sides, so it can't duplex. You've got networking, so this means that it can be connected to a computer network, so the scans that you do can be sent to any computer that is connected on the network, rather than having to have a wire connected to the computer which you're looking to receive these scans on. Preview is the preview area provides a scan of the document or the size of the image you have selected. Scan area is the size of the document to be scanned, so for example the paper size, so A3 or A4. Scan resolution is the quality of the scan. This is typically measured in dots per square inch or pixels per inch. And scan settings is the options available when scanning. There can be various settings depending on the machine and the model. Scan speed is about how quickly the machine scans, and it's typically measured in pages per minute. Again, business level machines that would require someone to scan a lot of documents would be a much higher rate than a cheaper machine you'd find in a home office. Photocopiers. Photocopiers are a combination of printers and scanners essentially. There's not going to be much here I'm going to mention. It's going to be different from anything we'll discuss for the individual printer and the scanner. A photocopier is simply the machine combined together. The office grade ones look like this. They have a number of drawers there for different sizes of paper to go into, automatic document feeder up the top. They actually have 2 or 3 different places where paper can come out of the machine, so 2 different trays where paper can actually come out of the machine. So they are very multi-purpose and they're very durable. High copying speed. Some of them have a finishing unit, which means that when you print you can select options to collate pages and automatically punch or staple them depending on what's required. And sometimes they can have an image rotation, so they can change between portrait and landscape quickly on them. Franken machine. So Franken machine falls under mailroom equipment. So this is something that you might use. So have a look at Franken machines. So this is what they look like. They are used for placing postage onto either packages or envelopes. They are cheaper than paying for stamps if you're producing a large number of, packages or envelopes. They can be very useful. They can save a lot of money. So how they work? You get the one on the left there is a smaller, cheaper model. It's really just useful for envelopes. You'd place the envelope on the top there, and that is a scale, so that would be able to measure the weight of the postage. On the entry system, on the keypad, you'd select the postage type, it's first class, second class recorded, and you'd then pass the envelope through the feeder that's in the middle, and that would then apply and print the postage onto the envelope. They also, some of the models have optional features for adding on advertisements onto the envelope as well. On the middle there, it's a more expensive model. This would be useful for if you're printing a larger number of stamps, postage onto envelopes and packages. You can see there that it has a area for collecting envelopes once they've been produced, so you can produce them in larger bundles. You can put them through the same postage and same weight. You can just keep passing through till your pile's finished. And you can see there that on the top left of the machine, if I just use the mouse here to indicate this little strip, what that's used for, see packages that are too thick to go through the feeder, what you do is you weigh it, select the postage type, and then you put a little adhesive strip of paper in there. It'll print the postage onto it, and then you take the back off it and you stick it to the package that you're going to post. That way obviously the package is going to fit through the feeder. You've got the last one there, that's more of a commercial machine for much larger groups of postage that's going to be sent. So features, we talked about most of these already. You've got the feeder, this determines the size or thickness of the envelopes which can be franked. The hopper holds the mail prior to processing. Meter, those are basically the buttons where you can select the postage price. Seals involved with water spray, that's on the more advanced machines. Stacker collects the frank mail, so that's the little collection tray there. The system display allows various options to be selected, so that's just the display. And we can read which options you've picked. You've got tape or a label row, so that's the little strip of adhesive sticker can go through to print postage on for packages, and the weighing device is the scale that's usually on the top of these machines. Again, if you work in a mailroom, if you work in an environment where a business sends a lot of mail, a lot of postage out, you probably come across one of these. And it can be a good example of a business process which you have to perform using office equipment. Could be to frank postage. Miscellaneous equipment, so there's other smaller piece of equipment which you can also use for this unit. So shredders, these destroy sensitive or confidential documents. They crosscut shredders are the most effective. The other ones are strip shredders, so that's where they simply cut the paper into strips. It's not as secure because it's quite easy for anyone to tape them back together and see what the information is if it's confidential and it's worth doing. So the cross shredders make it a lot harder to jigsaw them back together. You've got comb binders. These are used to create booklets. Punch creates the hole. A wire comb is then placed in the fingers of this device. It opens them up so that pages that you've punched can be inserted, and then you move the lever, it moves the combs back together. Typically a transparent cover and a thick cardback is used to make it look professional. So it's a cheap way of binding together a booklet or a document, typically for meetings, whatever it might be. Thermal binder, so these are used to make booklets a bit more professional. They heat seals the pages together. It's more expensive as well. You've got laminators. These are used to melt a protective transparent cover over documents which will be displayed or handled frequently to prevent damage. And audio equipment, this is equipment used for transcription, so it's usually a dictaphone or a device which plays it back. You usually have headphones because it's been used in an office, and it will be a foot pedal which is used to play and to pause the recording so that you've got both hands free to type up what you're hearing. So it's a quick way of transcribing. A lot of businesses won't use that, there's no need for it, but in a lot of industries, particularly in the legal sector, where you are typing up notes which have been recorded verbally, that's useful equipment. And if you perform a task which involves using that, then that's an excellent type of office equipment to use on this unit. So that gives you an idea of the different types of office equipment and their features. So how would you select the type of equipment? Now, this is always going to be specific to the process which you're writing your statement on, but we'll give you an idea of the thought process that typically you would have. So equipment is the machinery, so that's going to be, for example, the printer, and resources would be materials required. So if you're printing something, equipment is the printer, resources is paper and toner that you're using. So you'd have to choose the equipment based on the type of task that you've been given, the equipment that you have available for your workplace, and the suitability of each type of equipment in terms of its main use and its features for the task you have to do. So you want to explain the reasons why the equipment which you've selected is suitable for the task, just to justify what are the features on that equipment that have allowed you, that's made you select that specific bit of equipment to perform that task. Is there another printer? Why do you use that particular printer? Is there other equipment which perform a similar thing, but you decide not to use that, you decide to use the other machine because it produces a product that's of a higher standard, perhaps? Why do you use that particular bit of equipment to perform that task? You'd want to choose resources based again on the type of task that you're doing, the equipment you'll be using. So a lot of the time the resources related to equipment that you've chosen, and any special requirements for the work. So what does that mean, special requirements for work? That would be selecting a specific type of paper. Maybe you're using a thicker type of paper because the letter you're sending out, you want to have it seen to be of a higher quality. It's a special letter, it's not your run-of-the-mill statement or something. Maybe it's a thank you letter that's been sent out to a client and you're wanting it to look very professional, high quality. You'd use a special, thicker type of paper, perhaps. Maybe use a coloured bit of cards. Depends what it is you're doing, so it's very, very specific to the task that you're discussing, but you'd want to again justify the reasons why you're selecting that particular type of resource. You'd always check before you're using the equipment that the equipment and resources are available. there's sufficient supplies in stock, and you've booked the equipment if required. So might be you've got a large print job, and I know I'm using printing as an example here through all of this. It can be other equipment, but we'll focus on the printer now because it is fairly common. If you were doing a big print job, you'd maybe want to check around the office that other people weren't planning on using a printer. It might take you 40 minutes to print all the documents you have to print, and in that time someone else might have some work that they want printed. At least then they would know that the printer's not going to be in use for 40 minutes because you're going to be using it. Some businesses might have a facility or process for booking certain pieces of equipment, maybe perhaps like laminators, things that's not, you maybe just got one or two that's shared amongst the whole office. And you also want to make sure sufficient supplies, particularly if it's the special requirements to the tasks you're using. You need to use a specific paper or a different size of paper. You're not using A4, you're using a different size of paper. For example, you want to make sure that those supplies are in stock within your organisation. If they're not, you'd want to get them ordered. These are all important, especially if you're going to agree a deadline and you're going to stick and achieve that deadline. These things are very important for that. So, manufacturer's instructions. What are the manufacturer's instructions? So, all equipment have manufacturer's instructions. It's important to follow these when you're using them. There are certain dangers in ignoring these instructions, so that can include that the job takes twice as long, it could ruin the job, and it may do something hazardous or dangerous. It could also damage the equipment and require the organisation to replace it. You can find manufacturer's instructions by searching up online the make and model, and you'll find on the manufacturer's website there'll be a document on there that has all of the instructions in which to follow. A lot of the time it will be something which you are trained up on quite early on in the organisation. So for example, you'll be shown how to use the printer safely, how to use it properly. You probably won't have to go and actually look at that document from the manufacturer. A lot of the time someone else has already looked at it, know how to use equipment, and then they can simply show you it based on that. So a lot of the time the organisation instructions for using equipment safely is pretty much the same as the manufacturer's instructions. So it's just the way that your organisation has decided to apply those. So a lot of the time they are actually the same. But you could, if you want to enhance your evidence, have a look at the instructions online for the equipment that you're using, and you could maybe look to include that as part of your evidence that you have reviewed that and you apply those in the workplace. So find out what they are, particularly about using them safely. And what are the standard operating procedures for your SOP? So large organisations will have proper written documents for the standard operating procedures. So that is how to operate the equipment and the step-by-step instructions on how to do it safely. Small organisations, they won't have this. It'll just be usually manufacturer's instructions which you'd rely on. So if you've got SOPs, if you've got standard operating procedures, use them, part of evidence. If not, rely on the manufacturer's evidence for putting it together, and you can outline what the steps are and how you comply with them in your evidence. Why would you use any personal protective equipment? Maybe use gloves or goggles or something like that, particularly if you are repairing or changing equipment, if that's part of your role. The most dangerous bit of equipment you're probably going to be using in the workplace would be a shredder with its blades, and there'll be instructions about where you can place your hands and where not to place your hands. The other one is the printer, so particularly when if you're changing toner or if you're placing paper into it. You've got your safe lifting practice, your manual handling for lifting the box of paper, and you've also got ensuring the drawers are closed properly, you're not catching things in them, you're not putting your hands too far into the machine when you can't see if the equipment's on. It could be a risk of electrical shock or a mechanical component moving and injuring you. Those are some of the things that can go wrong. Keeping waste to a minimum. So it's important to keep waste to a minimum within the workplace. So what can you do to keep waste to a minimum? You can check, first of all, you understand the instructions. That helps you save on materials because you won't have to do any rework. So if you don't understand the instructions, you print it, turns out you've done it wrong, you're double-sided but one of the pages is upside down because you've selected the wrong option. You have to reprint all of it to do it the right way, and that creates wastage. You could use print preview. So if you go to print a document, you can use print preview, you can see what that document looks like before it prints, and you can make sure that the font size are all correct for the page, the margins are okay. You can use double-sided prints to save paper. You print in grayscale, so black and white, to save ink toner. You could use the correct resources to start with, so you might not be looking at what paper you're using and you can end up printing on the cheap paper, and actually this is a document that's going to a client and you don't want to print it on the scrap paper, you want to print it on the good paper, and you selected the wrong one. So make sure you're always using the correct resources. You want to keep equipment clean. If equipment is dirty, then unclean, then that can have an impact on the quality of what it's producing. Think of it, again, we'll keep sticking with the printer example. If it's dirty, there's marks or sticky stuff on it, the paper's going to touch it and it's going to ruin that. Don't put damaged paper into the automatic document feeder. If the paper's crumpled, you need to lift the tray, scan it that way. If you put it in and it's all crumpled, it's going to jam in the automatic document feeder, and then that will waste a bit of paper that you're scanning and you'll have to get it fixed. Check the document is in the correct order. Double check settings on the equipment. There's lots of different settings. You could be discussing what sort of settings you check to make sure that you are not wasting any materials. Maybe you could do a test printout, so before you print out 50 copies, you print out the one copy, make sure that's fine, then you can print the other 49. Understand which waste is reusable. Sometimes you can, if you print one side of paper, there's a scrap paper box or something, you can put the paper in and then it can be used for people write notes on or printing on the other side if it's not going to be used for anything. That is, you're not seeing as much of that anymore because of confidentiality, because the chances are there's going to be some confidential information on it, in which case it must be shredded. And you want to recycle waste where you can. Obviously not confidential waste though, that needs to be shredded. How do you keep equipment clean and hygienic? So there's reasons to do that. The quality of what you're producing is better if the equipment's clean. It removes bacteria, prevents damage to equipment, saves resources because you don't have to reprint, and it saves time. Cleaning electrical equipment safely. So this isn't, you do this, you do whatever is the procedure within your workplace. This is just an outline to give you an example of something you could maybe be looking at if that is something which you perform in the workplace. So let's have a look at cleaning electrical equipment safely. First step you'd probably do is turn off the power. You'd wipe for dust, you'd check the air vents, you'd use the correct materials, you'd use the correct protective equipment if you have to use gloves or goggles, and you wouldn't try to clean any of the inside areas because there's a risk of electrical shock or mechanical components injuring you. But you'd only do that if you've been trained properly on it and you knew the procedures and you're wearing the correct personal protective equipment. So that is an example, but you're going to want to be using an example which you've actually performed in the workplace, where you keep equipment clean and hygienic, and what you've done to wipe it down, to clean it, to make sure that it is safe to use, the equipment's not going to be damaged, and any resources isn't going to be wasted. Equipment and resource faults. So you'll find when you're using office equipment there are a number of common faults. Now these are going to be specific to the different types of office equipment that you're using. So think about a time where you have used some office equipment and there has been an issue or a fault. So we'll have a look at a few different examples which might be relevant. First is paper jams. So this is going to be caused for many different reasons. It requires opening up the printer and removing the paper, and it can be complicated in office photocopiers because there's a lot of different components and there's different panels you need to remove to get to certain areas, so that can be quite complicated and it can be quite a nuisance where you're trying to print something. It can take a bit of time to get that sorted. Running out of ink and toner. So someone will be responsible for ordering more and replacing the supplies. Many businesses outsource this, so it's all sort of automatic, but a lot of the time there'll be someone who within your organisation that's responsible for monitoring the stock levels and ordering in more when required. But it might be that that's not been done, there's been some sort of mistake, someone's used a lot of it, not replaced it, and you've run out of ink or toner when you're trying to print something. You get running out of any kind of resources. So for example, there's credit on a franking machine, so just think, what is the resource that I'm using on this equipment? You can run out of it and that'd be a problem. If you're using a comb binder, you could run out of combs, or laminated pockets if you're laminating. There's communication or network problems. So for any equipment that's connected to a network or to Wi-Fi, there can be problems from time to time which come up with this, which will affect the equipment. You could have memory problems, so that's when storage on the device runs out. Connection problems, so this can be due to loose or faulty wiring, cabling or connections. You can have mechanical problems where physical mechanical components of the equipment is broken and the component needs replaced. Overheating, so if the printer's been on all day, if the shredder's been on all day, after a number of hours it's going to overheat and it's going to switch off until it cools down. Again, that can be quite inconvenient if you're working towards a deadline and you can't use equipment for 40 minutes because it needs to cool down. And there can also be resource faults. That can be issues with things like printer cartridges or paper, etc. Okay, so reported problems. So those are the types of problems you can experience. Think about some problems which occurred when you've been using office equipment. When you've dealt with this issue, you will go through a sort of procedure which to report the problem and get the problem solved. So the first thing you need to do is identify the problem. So once you know there's a problem that's not working right, first thing you'd do is you'd self-troubleshoot. The extent to which you self-troubleshoot is going to be down to your competence, your experience and your training. So if you've not been trained to repair an item, you would only do the absolute basics of troubleshooting. If it's not something that's very easy or fairly obvious, you wouldn't get involved in it. So if it's not a case of replacing the paper on the printer, if it's something that's more advanced, a bigger fault than that, then you would have to go to someone who was trained to perform that task safely, to prevent injury to yourself and also further damage to the equipment. So there's 3 different places outlined here which you could go and report the problem to. So 3 different people. It depends on your problem. So it's just to point out here, it's not just the one person you might go to. Typically the first person you go to is your mentor, and if they can't solve the issue, they'd go to your manager and they'd be aware of any processes that would have to be followed regarding getting expert help externally. That should then ultimately lead to the issue being resolved. If it's an issue with IT equipment, you'd contact your IT service desk, where initially you speak to your first line support person. They will try and troubleshoot the device over the phone, and they'll basically tell you what to do and be asking you questions on it. If it's a more complicated problem, it'll go to second line support, and if they can't solve it, so second line support are people who are experts in certain software or equipment or machines, and if they can't solve it, then it'll go on to they'll refer it to the manufacturer for support to see what can be done to resolve the issue. At any of these stages, it will go straight to issue resolved if it's been resolved. And the other option is that some offices, you might not have IT. If you work for a small business, you might not have the IT service desk which to rely on. It might not also be an issue with IT equipment, in which case you might have an office specialist, someone who's been trained, that's an appointed person to repair or to solve these problems. Standards and deadlines. So any work which you're producing on office equipment should be completed to a certain standard or deadline. So what does that mean? So the standard is about quality, and quality means to what extent does the finished product meet the requirements. Again, this is going to be specific to the work which you're completing. So this is why this unit is best to be done on a business process. Think about that process and what is it that person is looking for you to do. If it's a print job, say you're printing a booklet because there's a sales meeting going on, there's going to be a number of customers or clients coming in, and you want to have a professional glossy booklet outlining a lot of information about the products which your organisation is offering them. What is going to be the quality standard of that? Well, it's got to be printed on good quality paper, it's got to be in full colour, it's got to be A4 because you don't want a big massive booklet that they have, you also don't have a tiny little one which they can't really read what's on it. It's got to be printed double-sided because it would be unnecessarily bulky if it was all on one page, and it's got to be bound together either using a comb binder or a thermal binder. It shouldn't just be stapled together because you want it to look high quality. Okay, and this will be outlined to you when whoever it is that's issuing you with this task to do, they'll outline what they want from it, and that is the quality, that is the standard which you've got to achieve. And the quality is what extent does that finished product meet requirements. That's just one example where it's involved in printing. If your office equipment is a computer and you're performing a task on the computer, you're processing some information on the computer, the standard could be the level of detail required. It could be the type of, the way that you're actually going to present the information. So the quality standard could be, it's got to be as a PDF. So you've got to produce a document, a template, and it's got to be sent on as a PDF. So you produce it maybe in Word, you type up the document, the template, you'd save it as a PDF, because that's what's been asked of you, and that is the quality, that is the standard which you've got to produce it to. So it's important when you're using office equipment to produce the outputs to the grade standard that you've been set. And deadlines is about completing the work to a set date, which is quite self-explanatory. So how do you do this? How do you meet the deadlines and the quality standards? A lot of the time it's about time management, and that's even for quality. So the first thing about quality is to make sure that you're aware of what the standard is. And if it's not clear, if you get an email asking you to do some work, perhaps you would give the person a phone call just to confirm what it is exactly that they're looking for you to do. So there's no ambiguity, there's no assumptions, you know very clearly what it is you're expected to do. Beyond that, it's all down to time management techniques, because if you don't manage your time, you're going to rush it, and if you rush it, it's going to be of a low quality. And when it comes to deadlines, time management is how you meet deadlines. So let's look at that. So the first thing is smart targets. So you need to have a specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound target. If you don't have a deadline, you're never going to complete that task, because if you prioritise your work, you're always going to prioritise other work before it. So it's also got to be something that you can measure and you know you've achieved. So most targets are smart targets anyway, but it's important to mention that whatever you're asked to produce should be a smart target, and you should be very clear, specific. You know what the person's looking for. Otherwise, you can't achieve. If you don't know what they're looking for, how can you meet their quality standard? You then want to prioritise based on what's urgent and important. You'll have other tasks which you're completing, and you'll want to prioritise what work you need to do first to make sure it is done by the deadline. You want to plan out your work. Maybe use a calendar, a to-do list, however it is you plan your work. You'd plan out how you're going to complete it. You'd maybe negotiate deadlines if you realise I've got a lot of work on at the moment. You'd maybe go back and try and negotiate a better deadline that's more suitable for you. Might not be possible, in which case you maybe discuss with your manager. You maybe seek help, or you maybe try and delegate tasks to other people. So that would be how you would look to achieve some ideas on how you'd maybe achieve quality standards and deadlines. But again, it's got to be specific to task which you have been performing. Leaving equipment ready for the next user. So it's important that when you're finished using your office equipment, that it's ready for the next person. You can't just leave it lying. So it's a laminate that's kept in the cupboard, you have to put the laminate back in the cupboard once you're finished using it, once it's cooled down. If it's a printer and you filled it with paper, you want to be putting the box away. You want to be putting all the strappings that you've cut off. If it's a box of paper, you've taken out a ream of paper, you've taken the wrapper off, you want to tidy all that stuff away, put it back. You don't want to leave loads of printing or documents you've scanned in the printer. Shredder, you'd empty, if it's part of it's a small shredder, you might want to empty the shredded paper into the bin or into the recycling bin or wherever it goes. You would want to leave it full so the next person comes, they can't get their work done because they have to waste time cleaning up stuff that you've done. So keep all your equipment nearby or where it's meant to be. Complete each part of the job before you start the next one. Don't do lots of half-finished jobs. Never leave the print job in the printer, and that's especially important for confidentiality reasons, because anyone could walk past, pick it up and read what it is. It might be something that's confidential. If you're interrupted, put all your work together and leave a note, so at least then you're printing something halfway through it and there's been called by your manager to go and do something for them and they said that you need to do it now, then at least leave a wee note so someone knows not to throw it out and that you've been taken away in an unexpected but important task. Place all equipment back where you found it, back where it should be kept, and in the condition in which you found it. So if it was broken or damaged, you'd report it, or if you mend it if you can, but you'd report it if not. So it's not left for the next person to go and they found that the equipment's been damaged or not functional. You check that all working surfaces and the floor is clear, and you put any unused resources back. So if you were using a special type of card that's not normally kept in the printer tray, you put it back in the stationery cupboard where it was found. And don't take the last of anything without to find someone. So if it's the last of something that's not used very often, a resource, it's the last toner cartridge, it's the last stream of paper, you would notify someone, whoever's responsible for it, so they can get more in, rather than leave it to the next person that goes to use it to find there's no paper and they need to wait till some stuff's ordered in. That would cause them a delay in the work that they're producing. Right, so I hope that's helpful. The best way to complete this unit is to take that information which went over the whole unit, went over both performance and knowledge points there. Think about a task where you've completed using office equipment and write it based on that and really relate it to your workplace. So I hope that helps.